Well, first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking Harriet and the rest of the team at the Terrapin Group for inviting me to speak here today. She asked me to speak about building companies in the agricultural technology area. So the theme I'll be talking to is how to seed, nurture, and exit technology startup companies. And the way we've done that is I've divided into different stages of growth of a company, and we'll look at some of the key challenges and the key success factors at each of those stages and how to build companies accordingly. But first, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a few minutes to explain who I am and what our companies do. And I'm actually wearing two hats today. The first one is I'm a managing director with the Kirchner Private Capital Group. The Kirchner Private Capital Group is a traditional merchant bank that really has three service lines. The first one is transaction services, and our sweet spot is doing early stage or helping sell technology or proprietary companies to large strategic companies. The second thing is asset management in terms of service lines, where we help funds both in terms of the advisory work, helping them through different stages of the fund life, such as end of fund life issues and others. We've also helped some funds at the startup stage in terms of providing different types of support, such as technical support or industry support. Third area that we have expertise, or our third service line, is transition services, where we will work with companies that are going through change, help them assess their strategy and reposition themselves, and offer temporary management services, whether it's to fill a void, such as a temporary vice president of business development, and bring in expertise that you only need, high-level expertise, but a very short period of time, or act as an interim CEO or that type of work. And the way we're structured is we're structured across five different industry focus areas, and one of those is agriculture and food, and I head that group. The second hat I wear is Foragen Technologies. I'm the managing director for a 2000 vintage fund. We have a few investments left in this fund, but most of it has been liquidated. Our strategy was investing in early stage technology companies in the agricultural and food space. What we did is we went across North America shopping for technologies in the research institutions, and with the objective of creating and building companies out of this. And some of these companies, we were the initial CEO, built the team, built the strategy as we licensed the IP and then took them forward. And you'll see we've invested across a number of different sectors in the agriculture and food area. Some of the areas that we have here are biopesticides, bioproducts, nutritional ingredients are just some of the examples. So we have quite a breadth of experience across a number of different companies in the sector, from large Fortune 500 companies to early stage startup companies at the company creation level, to ultimately to the exit, as we've ran some M&A processes for some of these. What I thought I would do is highlight just a few of these and just to give a bit of a flavor of what we've done. Cadena is an early stage bioinsecticide company. It took a product from a natural plant that was consumed for thousands of years, therefore had a fairly safe profile, but was known to have a fairly strong insecticidal activity. And we built a company, validated the technology, and at one point we determined that you can't really build a biopesticide company on one product, and determined that the best thing we could do is to roll it up into a platform company, and hence that's how we became one of the larger investors in AgriQuest, which was really, in our view, the leading biopesticide company in the world. And as many of you may know now, AgriQuest was a fairly successful exit earlier this summer, selling for close to $500 million to Bayer Crop Science. So this is an exit we were quite pleased with. Another company is MCN Bioproducts. MCN took a waste product from canola oil crushing, took the meal, and made a replacement for fish meal. Fish meal is a captured market. There's no more raw material available. You can only produce so much per year because that's how much is available in the ocean. It's about a 9 or 10 billion market, but the demand for it is growing exponentially. And the price of fish meal has gone from about 10 years ago, $800 to $900 a ton, to today close at times to $2,000 a ton. MCN was sold for an undisclosed price earlier this year to Bunge, and our return was quite successful and somewhat comparable to AgriQuest. MCN is a company that I saw initially out of a university and was the acting CEO, built the company from there, built the management team, and moved on to just be chairman and managing the investment. We still have a few companies. One of these is Chicago-based Chromatin, which is a GM, genetic modified platform technology, has partnerships with Monsanto, has partnerships with Bayer, has partnerships with Dow, has partnerships with Syngenta, and also has become the leading producer of sorghum, forage sorghum in the United States. So it's a company we've seen a lot of growth, we've repositioned, and we're really pleased on the progress that this company has done. And lastly, another company we're quite excited, and I think there was a speaker earlier today that maybe we should catch. There is Radiant Technologies. They have an extraction process that is very elegant and very efficient at harvesting actives from different plant materials and has a number of significant partnerships, and we think this is one you should keep an eye on in the next few years. So the point here is we've worked with companies from the company creation side all the way to the sell side. And hopefully we've learned a few scars, and from our scars, a few lessons, and I hope to share some of these with you. The way we see companies is they grow very much like plants. As many of you may have seen, plants have different stages of growth, from the seed to the seedling to flowering, ultimately to maturity and ripening. And we see different stages, but somewhat similar in companies, where you have the germination stage, where you really take the idea and build something around it, then try to get to a beta stage where you have a product concept that's somewhat validated, and ultimately you have a product that's in the marketplace. And at some point you will try to sell and get a return to the investors on that basis. So I will proceed, and each of those stages, the value increases hopefully, but not necessarily in a straight linear process. We see that the stages will go up in terms of plateaus. And every time you hit a key milestone, the plateaus will go up. Here I've divided them by stages, and in reality, it can sometimes be divided in sub-stages. So as an example, if you have a really interesting biopesticide, and you show that you can kill chewing pests, if you now you've developed a proof of concept that it will also kill sucking pests, you have a much bigger marketplace, hence the value goes up. So if we start and look at the first stage, which is a germination stage, where you have a technology, an idea, a concept, you show that it can do something. What do you do with this? So there's a lot of things you need to do to prepare and have the right resources, but the first thing is understanding where the technology fits in the marketplace. So you really need to understand the science, and you really need to understand the markets, and make the linkages between and figure out where you can position it. And in reality, at that stage, it's probably just a guess. So you know it has insecticidal activity, as an example, in the biopesticide I use, but you may not know which type of insects, therefore which types of markets, which types of crops, and you really have to move down a path of exploring and developing and understanding much better your technology that you're working with. And as you build this plan to explore which opportunities you want to focus on, you also have to build the right team, and this is a common theme that you'll see throughout. It's all about team, but what I will say is that team requirements or team issues vary from stage to stage. And a good example of that is one of my former bosses, who was in the mining industry, had a saying. He says, look, when we're in the mining business, we have a saying. There's three types of management you need to build a successful mine. The first time is when you have a geologist, is you build, as soon as he finds the mine, you take him out, because all he knows is how to keep prospecting, and he'll keep prospecting. Once the mine is built, you take the mining engineer out, and then you bring the operations manager, because the mining engineer will keep mining. And it's a lesson that we learned quite painfully with one of our companies, where we brought in a marketing guy, a good CEO with a decent track record, but all he focused was on selling, when yet he didn't have a product that was up to par and at an attractive margin, and really ended up bringing the company in a lot of difficult situations. And also you need to know how much resources, financial and other, you need to take the company forward. Through this, what you end up with is a go-forward plan. The go-forward plan as a business plan, to me, really has two functions. It really forces you through an exercise that helps you map out a direction you want to move forward, and it's a best guess of how you want to move forward. And the second thing is it's a measuring tool to make sure that you're progressing towards the right path. Another company that we were working with, which is now quite successful, one of its previous CEOs thought he was doing a great job, and what we did with him in the exercise is, after 2 years, we took his initial business plan, on which he raised the Series B round, and sat and said, look, here are the 10 things you would accomplish with the money you've received, and he only had achieved one. And he was shocked to learn that that's the only progress he had. But the point is, sometimes you lose perspective, and that's why I think a business plan should be a good measuring tool to monitor progress going forward. Moving on to, once you have a business plan, if you're going to monitor it, it's really useful to use them as a monitoring tool, and therefore I find dashboards and things like that, or other monitoring tools, as a good way to communicate to employees of the direction of the company, which quite often I find is not well done, and secondly, to make sure that everybody's motivated towards the same target. And I can tell you when you're at a board and you see a company coming forward and the CEO has to sit there and explain why he's 6 months behind on a certain target, it really creates a sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency is sometimes a key thing that I think is important of the culture of the company for success. Moving on to the second stage, you've now moved towards where you have a product concept. But having a technology is not necessarily a product. There's a lot of things between knowing that a certain compound has a certain activity, whether it's as a pesticide or as a herbicide, and having a product that's formulated, that is fine-tuned, that works well. We know which pest it will kill, has been received regulatory approval, and you know you can manufacture it at the right cost. There's a lot of work you need to prepare to get through that, and if you get to a product concept that makes sense, you've significantly de-risked that value proposition. And part of that is really making sure you address the right markets and making sure you're truly focused on creating something where there's value. So I've seen at times, I'm trying to remember, there was a vaccine or one area I'm not that hot off on as an example is animal health, especially vaccines in production agriculture. And the reality is it's almost as expensive to get those registered as a human pharmaceutical, but most of those are in markets in the 10s or 20s or 30s or 40s of millions of dollars with a very thin margin. So I just don't see the return potential. So usually we take a fairly negative look, but that's just an example of making sure you're focusing on an opportunity which has a really interesting value proposition. And yet, again, you need to make sure you have the right resources. And one of the key themes here is the right team. But the skill sets here will vary quite a bit. So then it's no longer about building the technology, but it's also understanding how to fit in the marketplace, how to position it, and therefore you need to start building your marketing expertise going forward. The other thing that comes through is there's different ways to commercialize the technology. So you may sell it, as an example, even though you have a really nice insecticide, you may license it out, you may find distributors, or you may build your own sales force. If you build your own sales force, it's much more costly, requires much more resources, and quite likely can't do as well as somebody who has a global sales force and spend as much money as they can. Moving on to the commercialization phase. This is an area that I find quite challenging. This is an area where you see a lot of excitement. If you have something that has merit and value, you'll quite often see a lot of partners or clients coming in and showing a lot of interest. But managing that whole sales pipeline period and making sure you have a realistic understanding of where you are in the sales pipeline and making sure you really end up with the results you anticipate is a key challenge. And what I find a mistake that's often made is often you'll find, look, we're just two weeks away from a great deal, 2 weeks away from a great deal, and 6 or 12 months later, you're still 2 weeks away from a great deal. So it's finding, getting that sense of perspective, excuse me, and making sure you're really focusing on true sales and true revenue generation. And ultimately, the goal is to have a client who's willing to pay you what you want for your product. Another point we try to have is always make sure there's a contingency plan. We find that quite often we don't like our companies to work on a linear path. We want to make sure they're working on 2 to 3 multiple opportunities. Hopefully there's the resources to do that. And some may succeed and some will fail, but at least at some point something will work. So an example is we had a company who was solicited, a completely unsolicited offer to be acquired. And the board forced the company to keep focusing on its other business development activities in parallel. Hopefully we would have been acquired at that time, but it didn't work out. Well, at least there were licensing opportunities, there were partners that were being to execute, and the company effectively did not lose a step and was still moving forward in the right plan. And that's a way to move forward. And one of the key reasons is the challenges, you can never know what the real way is of moving forward is. And it's always important to validate and keep testing. So your business plan is just a tool, but ultimately you have to the clients will tell you if you're on the right path or not, and you will have to adapt, and that's why multiple plans in parallel usually helps. And lastly, probably in my mind the most important is how to harvest the value of the company. And I have it here at the end, but I do not see this as the last stage. You really have to make the decision of what's the right risk reward. You may want to exit at an earlier stage. And an example is we're currently working on an M&A process on an ag technology. And although many of the potential acquirers are telling us, well, we would like you to see this test or this result or that result, some of the partners are telling us, great, like they're making sure there's nobody else that has the rights to the intellectual property, which would be what would happen at the next stage. And the biggest and most important thing for them was to making sure that the IP is completely unencumbered, not even an option on the technology or a first right. And that really increased value. We were in another M&A process earlier this year where there were 2 licenses out. And we spent a fair amount of time and resources and reps and warrants trying to get out of those licenses and terminate those. In reality is what the company had done over the last year and a half ultimately had diminished value at the exit perspective because there was a cost to terminate those. So one of the key challenges is really understanding and making sure everybody is on the same wavelength. Quite often management, the latest round investors, and the earliest investors had totally different goals. Somebody in the late round say, look, this is only 2x or 3x for us, not that exciting. The earlier investors may say, look, we're late stage, we're year 9 of this, we're dealing with end of fund life issues, we want out, and management is sitting there and our stock options are great or not so great or whatever. So the key is to try to make sure everybody has the same goal and you're fully committed to a process. And ultimately, you really need to understand what the value proposition is. And the value proposition will be different for different acquirers. It will depend what level of breadth of application they can apply. If your product has applications in 3 marketplaces and acquirer 1 is in all 3 marketplaces, but acquirer 2 is only one of those markets, different value proposition. How complementary or competitive is it with a product line? Do they have to build a new plant, or is this complementary to their production systems? So the value proposition will change with everyone, and you really have to know how to position that and understand what are the key factors. Another key element in the value proposition is how much risk there is, and really mitigating that through the due diligence process. But ultimately, with technologies, predicting the value is a fairly hard thing to do. We've gone through transactions where the lowest LOI and the highest LOI was a 100-fold difference. And it's not because this was a distressed asset it's just the perception is very different in terms of the beholder of the technology. So, or the acquirer. And a lot of that is really creating a competitive environment, but knowing how to position it with a different acquirer to make sure that they fully understand the potential this technology has for them.